Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Here's a sentence I never expected to say. We should be more like Donald Trump, said the Labour Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, this week. She didn't mean that we should be wearing orange bronzer or hanging out with the stars of adult movies, though to be clear, these are perfectly legal activities. What the Chancellor meant is that we should all cheer up. She reckons that there'll be sunny days ahead, and a dose of Mr. Trump's manic positivity will get us there faster. Maybe. But what might sound like positive thinking to me might strike you as just positively delusional. There are limits to what even the most powerful leaders can achieve. Mr. Trump may have helped to engineer a deal in the Middle East, but the day one ceasefire in Ukraine was never going to happen. Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves can wish for growth as much as they like, but as the old folks used to say, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. But what politicians can do, if they want to, is level with the voters about what they plan to do, if they actually do have a plan. Let's see if anyone picks up that challenge this morning. I spoke to Chancellor Rachel Reeves a little earlier. Chancellor, the public inquiry into the Southport murders announced by the Prime Minister will tell us some more. But would you accept that the system is failing? It failed the little girls and it failed everybody who is actually still at risk.
I mean, it's appalling what happened in Southport and the evil, cowardly acts of that man. The impact will be felt forever by those families, and it's right that there's now a public inquiry to establish what on earth went wrong. The man was referred 3 times to Prevent. He'd been found carrying a knife on multiple occasions, and he'd attacked a boy he was at school with, and yet he was able to slip through the system. And so it is absolutely essential that we learn lessons, not just to provide some sort of understanding for the families of who've lost their loved ones, but also to stop anything like this ever happening again. And no stone should be left unturned in that inquiry.
We, as you say, will learn more, but this man made ricin. He had an Al-Qaeda manual, in themselves both terrorist offences. No one can see what's in his mind. But was it a mistake for the Prime Minister to imply last autumn that people who were asking whether there might be a terrorist element here were either endangering a prosecution or had some underlying prejudiced motive, or both?
So I think it's really important that when a government speaks, when ministers speak about something before there's been a trial, that people are very careful about the words that they use, because if a government of any colour did anything to prejudice a trial, then that minister would never be forgiven. And so ministers do have to use words with caution. I think part of what this public inquiry needs to establish is when Prevent look at things, what they regard as terror, because my understanding of this case is because they didn't think that the killer had an ideology, that therefore he wasn't at risk in the same way that somebody who might have an ideological motive might. But just because you don't have an ideological motive doesn't mean that you can't be a mass killer and incredibly dangerous.
Well, indeed.
These are things that the public inquiry must look at.
Indeed, they'll study all of that and exactly what ideology means and so on. But I guess the question I'm really asking is one that was asked by the Independent Review of Terrorism. Essentially, police and ministers ruled out terrorism, or warned that terrorism shouldn't be seen as a motive here. The Independent Reviewer of Terrorism said this week, Jonathan Hall, that it would have been better for ministers to be more transparent about what they did know and didn't know, and that might have headed off the rumour-mongering and the consequent violence we saw on the streets.
I think it's really important that ministers take advice from the Crown Prosecution Service and from police and don't say anything to prejudice an inquiry. That's incredibly important. The killer will now spend the rest of his life in prison. And it is really important that ministers didn't do anything ahead of that trial that could have prejudiced it in any way at all.
All right, let's turn to, if you like, more conventional territory for you. When you said this week we need to be more positive in our outlook, more like Donald Trump, did you forget that America's GDP was growing at the end of last year while ours was just flat?
Well, we need
He's got something to boast about.
Well, and we've got loads of stuff to boast about in our country. We've got some of the best businesses, some of the most amazing entrepreneurs, some of the highly skilled workers in the world, some of the best universities in our country.
We haven't got 3% growth, though.
No, and we haven't for a long time.
Like
Trevor, we haven't for a long time. For more than a decade, our economy has flatlined. And I know that we need to go further and faster in delivering that growth, exploiting the massive opportunities that we have as a country. And as a government and as British businesses, we need to be championing Britain. And that's what I was doing this week in Davos, shouting on a world stage about everything our great country has to offer and saying to investors and saying to some of the biggest companies in the world, come to Britain and take another look at Britain. Because under this government, we are removing the barriers that have stopped you investing and getting stuff done in Britain for too long. I'm really excited, and my enthusiasm and excitement for what this country has to offer has never burned brighter. And I'm determined that we're going to go further and faster in delivering that growth so that we can improve the living standards of ordinary working people in our country.
In the autumn, you and the Prime Minister were channeling Eeyore. How come Tigger suddenly turned up? What's changed? The growth pattern is flat on its back still.
Well, when I
Our
became...
forecast is... It's still lower than anybody else's in G7, or nearly.
Oh, well, wait a second.
Any other big country.
No, that's not true. The IMF revised up the forecast for the UK just over a week ago. They only revised up in the G7, the UK and the US. We're now predicted this year to be the fastest growing major economy in Europe. So let's not talk our country down. There's loads to be positive about, and others are saying those things. But look, Trevor, when I became Chancellor, I inherited a difficult situation. I had to put the public finances back on a firm footing. We've seen what happens when governments lose control of the public finances. We've now taken the action to put those public finances back on a firm footing, and now the focus is all on economic growth because we want to raise living standards of people in our country.
When we spoke before, the focus was on ordinary working people. What do you think ordinary working people would have made about the fact that you went to Davos, the sort of capitalist chinwag, and you decided that you were going to listen to non-doms, millionaires, and row back on what you said you were going to do, which was to take money from them?
It's a basic principle for me that if you make Britain your home, you should pay your taxes here. And under Labour, you will. Even the previous government, the Conservatives, in the end...
But not as much as you said they would.
No, that's not true. No, Trevor, we haven't changed any expectations about the amount of money we're going to bring in. What we've made some changes to this week is something called the Temporary Repatriation Facility, which means that very wealthy people in this country can bring money in from overseas without paying punitive tax
Which is not what you were going to do before.
Well, no, we're raising exactly the same amount of money that we set out in the budget. We're getting rid of the concept of non-domicile in the tax system so that if you make Britain your home, you pay your taxes here. But we also want to be a welcoming place.
So if I may just be clear about this. So you're saying, all those people say this is a watering down because 11,000 millionaires have left the country. You're saying it's not a watering down at all. It's just as tough as it was before.
Well,
You said at Davos you listened to what you call the non-dom community and you're changing things. Are you changing or not?
Yes, what we're doing is making it easier for people to bring money in from overseas to the UK without facing punitive tax rates, because we want Britain to be a place that's bringing in inward investment. So this, under these changes, we're still getting rid of the concept of non-domicile in the tax system. If you make Britain your home, you'll pay your taxes here. The changes we're making is if you're bringing in money from overseas, you won't be hit, as you are today, with punitive tax rates.
I'll tell you why this matters. It's not nitpicking. You are making a change in response to what you would say is the complaints from that community. Since you came to office, you imposed 40 billion quid's worth of taxes. You told farmers they'd have to pay more inheritance tax, and you took away the winter fuel allowance. You can see that this week, people watching you in Davos amongst all these millionaires and you saying, well, I've listened to this community, are wondering why you can't listen to the farmers?
Well, I had to raise significant sums of tax in the budget to make sure that the public finances stacked up. And people would never forgive me wait a second. People would never forgive me if this government lost control of the public finances in the way that Liz trusted and the impact that had on interest rates and borrowing costs.
But
the changes I've made around non-doms,
who are you
Trevor,
raising it from?
The changes I've made on non-doms are not costing taxpayers a single penny of money. That's the difference here.
But they are the changes, the inheritance tax changes you're making will cost farmers.
Yes, but in the most recent year, 40% of the benefits of agricultural property relief went to just 7% of estates. In fact, just 37 estates in our country benefited more than £100 million of tax relief. That is not affordable and sustainable, and that's why they've made those changes. But agricultural property still only faces half of the inheritance tax rate that anybody else faces. I think that's a fair and proportionate change.
We could discuss this again. As you know, the small farmers don't agree with that.
The small farmers won't be affected.
They don't agree with your analysis
Well, this is
of this
data from from the tax office that you will only be affected essentially if you've got an estate worth of £3 million.
I've discussed this with you and your colleagues. The point I'm really driving at here is that for some people, this concession, let's call it that, to non-doms contrasts with what you're doing to other people. And this morning, you've now written that you're going to tackle the spiralling benefits bill by taking away people's driving licences, getting people off the stick. Now, this may be justified, but many working people will think that non-doms get sympathy and people on welfare get tough love.
This is about tackling fraud in the benefits system, and quite right too. If people aren't entitled to benefits, they shouldn't be getting them. And at the moment, we waste billions of pounds as a country every year in giving money to people who aren't entitled to it. And what we're saying is if you're ripping off the state and ripping off other taxpayers, we will take money directly out of your bank account and you risk losing your driving licence. So proper penalties for people who frankly, are getting money that they are not entitled to, and we'll crack down on that. By the end of the forecast period, we're going to be raising more than £4 billion a year by cracking down on fraud and error. For too long, this has gone unchecked. And I think most working people would say, absolutely spot on. I don't want to pay my tax to subsidise somebody who's not entitled to support.
All right, let's talk about your plans to kickstart growth. Is it time that the third runway at Heathrow was cleared for takeoff?
I'm not going to comment on speculation.
Why not?
Because that's speculation, and we'll set out our plans in our own way. But the reforms we've set out this way...
OK, let me put it another way. Would you like to see this third runway happen?
Trevor, you could ask it in lots of different ways, but I'm not going to comment on that speculation. We'll set out our plans, but you've seen this week what the Prime Minister has announced, what the Environment Secretary has announced, that we're going to make it easier to get stuff built in Britain, whether that's transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, or indeed housing. For too long, governments have backed the blockers and not the builders, and that's going to change.
But you see, this is exactly the problem. Yeah, I understand the slogan, builders, not blockers, and all the rest of it. I ask you, would you support one of the biggest builders' projects that there has been, that has been on the stock since 1946? And I say to you, do you want this to happen? And what you then say is, I can't tell you.
Well,
now, that is actually the history of this.
We'll make our...
Oh, there is an announcement coming.
We'll make announcements about investments when we are ready to.
When might that be?
But already, since we got elected, we've signed off expansion plans at City Airport and Stansted Airport to make it easier and cheaper for British families to go on holiday and to welcome investment.
I know you want to deflect from Heathrow, but the point is, if you don't make a decision now, if you made a decision this week, it still wouldn't be till 2040 that things in operation. Why are you hanging about? You keep telling me it's urgent and we're going to take out all the blockages and so on. Why not just say, I'm the Chancellor, I want it to happen.
We'll make announcements about policies when we're ready to, with full collective ministerial responsibility. But I think you can see from this government the thing that we have signed off.
Not everybody in the Cabinet agrees, then?
We will make our announcements when we're ready to do so. But let me be clear, already this government have signed off housing developments, a data centre infrastructure to support the AI and tech industry. We've supported onshore wind developments. We have supported a number of developments to get our country growing again. Decisions that were on the desks of previous ministers, but those decisions were either blocked or stalled. And as a result, we haven't had the economic growth and the investment that our country deserves to create those good jobs, paying decent wages.
Let me just have very one quick go on something allied. People at Gatwick have been banging on for years that they want a third runway. That would expand... Second runway, I beg your pardon. That would expand capacity. That would promote growth. Shouldn't they have it?
Gatwick and Luton have both got planning applications in at the moment. The decisions will be made on that. I can't comment on that because they're quasi-judicial decisions, but both Gatwick and Luton decisions will be made in the coming weeks.
All right. One good way in which you might boost growth would be to increase trading with our biggest trade partner, which is the EU. Yeah. There is a thing called the Pan-Euro-Mediterranean Convention, which it is said could make trade not frictionless, but much easier. Are we going to join?
Well, it was really interesting to see Maroš Šefčovič this week suggest that Britain might be welcome.
The EU Trade Commissioner.
Yeah, the UK might be welcome in that pan-European and Mediterranean customs framework. And we are absolutely happy to look at these different proposals because we know that the deal that the previous government secured is not working well enough. It's not working well enough for small businesses trying to export. It's not working well enough for larger businesses either. We're grown up to admit that, whereas the previous government said there were no problems at all. And where there are constructive ideas, we are happy to look at those, as long as they're consistent with the red lines that we set out in our manifesto.
So that relationship is something that you will look at positively and seriously?
Yes. Last month, I was the first UK Chancellor to attend the Eurogroup of Finance Ministers meeting in Brussels. That's all about resetting our relationship. You're absolutely right, Trevor. If we want to grow our economy, we've got to boost trade, not just with European countries, but with countries around the world, whether that's the US or fast-growing economies like India, China and the Gulf countries. But we want to do that because it's good for British business and therefore it's good for jobs here in Britain and working people in Britain.
I could pick away at all sorts of individual things, but I want to try and get
an idea. Well, you can see a theme here. We want to grow the economy and go further and faster
that is exactly what I want to do. I want to see if I can sum up the Iron Chancellor's approach to growth. Let me put a quote to you. We must break down the barriers to growth built up in our system over decades. Decisions take too long, burdens on businesses are too high, infrastructure projects get delayed for years and years and years. As a result, we have seen economic growth choked off. Actually, what you've been saying this morning sounds very like that. Would you agree with that?
Well, what I would say is we are doing the things. We're not just talking. Everyone would agree that we need to see economic growth and it's being choked off. The difference between governments of the past and this government is we are doing the practical things, whether it's on regulation, whether it's on planning reform, pensions reform, or indeed boosting trade with our nearest neighbours and trading partners. We're doing practical things to get that growth, not just talking about it.
But you recognise who this comes from, don't you?
I don't know who that's from. I'm saying...
Liz Truss, and it sounds... The message you've given me this morning sounds really familiar.
Apart from Liz Truss and the numerous Conservative Prime Ministers and Chancellors of the last few years didn't do the practical things that were necessary to grow our economy. And that's the difference, because one by one, we're removing the barriers that have stopped businesses from investing for too long in Britain. We're going to turn around this performance. I'm determined to be the Chancellor that brings growth back to the UK economy.
OK. Can I just ask, finally, a personal question? And you must know about this. Does it hurt you to be described as Rachel from accounts?
Well, you know, I've probably been called worse things, Trevor, but I became an MP almost 15 years ago now. Before I became a Member of Parliament, I worked as an economist at the Bank of England, and then I worked in the private sector in financial services for Halifax Bank of Scotland. I'm proud of the jobs that I did before I became a Member of Parliament, but in the end, people are going to judge me on the job that I'm doing now, the job that I'm doing as Chancellor of the Exchequer.
But do you think if you were a bloke, that condescending label would be attached to you?
Well, some people don't want this government to succeed. Some people don't want me to succeed. I've spent my life proving people wrong, proving that I can do stuff that I've been underestimated for. In the end, people will judge me. Can I stabilise the public finances? We've done that. Can I grow the economy? I'm determined to do so.
Rachel Reeves, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Let's go to our panel now. We're joined by the former Number 10 Communications Director, Craig Oliver, the Labour peer, Aisha Hazarika, and the broadcaster, John Sopel. Let's start with this non-DOMS thing, Aisha. She made her case, but set against the treatment of farmers and pensioners. It feels odd that a Labour Chancellor is talking about listening sympathetically to the non-DOM community.
I don't think it's that odd coming from Rachel Reeves, because I think after Keir Starmer took over the Labour Party, if you look at the Chancellor that had gone before her, the John McDonnells, the Jeremy Corbyn eras, she had to do a huge amount of heavy lifting with people like Jonathan Reynolds as well to, get the confidence of investors and the city. So I don't think it's a huge shock to people that they have spent a lot of time building up relationships with these kinds of people. I think what she has always been keen to sort of argue is that she's not going to be so much driven on what people would think is traditional Labour ideology, old school religion. She is very pragmatic about what needs to be done. And I think she clearly feels if this measure needs to be done in terms of investment, then that's what she's going to do. But I think Rachel has never, ever been a kind of traditional Labour ideology-driven politician.
Okay, Craig, this must make you feel quite comfortable.
I thought watching that interview, you're seeing a quite frustrated Chancellor. If you wind back a couple of weeks ago, the papers were full of stuff about whether Rachel Reeves was going to survive the Parliament as Chancellor, that kind of thing. And I think she had a real brush with disaster there. She was really worried and there was concern there. And what you've seen as a result of that is a Chancellor coming out saying, boosterism, we're going to have growth, I'm going to be the Chancellor that's doing that. The problem is that whenever you put the hard cases to her, she pulls back. And I think she's struggling with a cabinet that doesn't want to go as far as she actually wants to go. And if she was given her head, I think she'd push all this stuff a lot harder, because I think she's worked out at the end of 5 years, unless we've improved living standards, unless we've improved growth, we're in serious trouble.
Well, John, actually, picking up Craig's point, I was mildly surprised that she was so, what's the right word, Delphic on Heathrow.
Yeah, when all the briefing has been that she's absolutely in favour of it. The only thing that I can assume from that, and you picked it up very sharply in the interview, is that she hasn't got the support of her cabinet yet on board and therefore doesn't want to go too much out on a limb to be saying, I am in favour of the extra runway at Heathrow, and then finding that the government, there isn't the support around the cabinet table to get it through. I thought there was a real course correction in that interview. You go back a few months when everything was gloom and doom and we've inherited a nightmare and it's terrible. That had an effect on the economy. It drove down confidence, and she now needs to get confidence up again. She needs to have policies that are more effective, so maybe non-DOMs, if you've got, hundreds of millionaires leaving the country and you don't want them to, maybe that's a small price you have to pay.
Sorry, maybe it says something about my mentality, but as I hadn't thought about this before the actual interview, but we're suddenly swinging from Eeyore to Tigger.
Well, I mean, what I think is also interesting is in the run-up to the election, commentators such as ourselves, we sat around, and one of the great frustrations we talked about was short-term thinking in British politics and British governance, that there were these big projects, whether it was building more infrastructure, HS2, these third runways. We just could not get projects off the ground. This was something that commentators of all different political stripes bemoaned. And I do think she deserves some credit for saying right now we have got to. If Trump's thing
but the thing
is
is, when I
drill
said,
baby
this
drill,
big
we should be
project-
build baby build. We've got to get this country building. It's got to be housing, infrastructure, transport, energy.
No, I don't disagree with any of that. I think the problem that she's got is that, as John said, it started off incredibly negative. And look at the big things the government's done. They've been anti-growth. The £25 billion national insurance contributions for businesses, real problematic. We saw that had a real impact on employment, that kind of thing. So the problem that she's got, I think, is she's coming out and trying to sound boosterish, trying to sound like she's actually willing to do what's necessary to promote growth. But actually, as she's pulling at the fences, you put these things to her and say, look, are you actually going to deliver on these kind of things? And she's not willing to push through with it. And that's the problem, that on the one hand, you have a kind of like, I'm going to be boosterish, and on the other hand, like, oh, I'm not really very sure about
Well, I
this.
think, to be fair, though, I don't think it's fair to say she's not going to push through on those things. I think what we all would agree is she does want to push through on these things. Now, we're 6 months into this new government. We all know that these things take time. I mean, the Tories had 14 years and didn't do any of these projects. So we know these things take time. But she is going to be, and I've worked with Rachel for many, many years, I know that she will be leading the charge in terms of getting these projects through.
I just wish that for Britain's sake we could get things.
Yeah.
I went into journalism 40 years ago on the south coast of England, and there was talk then about maybe building a bypass or a tunnel around Stonehenge on the A303. 40 years on, nothing has been done. And it's just, you know, I've heard the talk about the third runway.
And you also have a very powerful figure in the cabinet called Ed Miliband, who seems to be pulling dramatically against
but
it.
let's be honest, Ed Miliband is not running. I mean, look, I used to work for Ed Miliband, he's a good friend of mine. He's not running the show, Craig. That is absolutely clear.
He's a powerful figure in cabinet
He's
who's made some very clear statements about net zero.
Do you honestly think that Ed Miliband is going to stop all of this? Do you think Ed Miliband is single-handedly going to stop all of this building, honestly?
I think the point is coherence in terms of messaging. And on the one hand, you regularly see Ed Miliband out there saying what he wants to do, and on the other hand, you see an interview like that with the Chancellor. There's an obvious and real tension there that hasn't been resolved.
You've worked in politics. You know that secretaries of state can lobby, but ultimately it will be the Chancellor and the Prime Minister that make those decisions.
I love seeing the meta-argument at this cabinet table played out here. It is just after 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Chancellor's told this programme that lessons must be learned in the inquiry into the Southport killings. Rachel Reeves said a decision on a Heathrow third runway would follow after a collective cabinet decision, and she'd look at a potential new customs arrangement with Europe. Well, there's lots to come this morning. Shortly, we'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch. We'll try to understand what Trump back in the White House means for the Ukraine war with the President's former special representative to the Ukraine, Kurt Volker. And as we mark 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, we'll hear from survivor Renee Salt. It's almost 3 months since Kemi Badenoch, must get that name right, became leader of the Conservative Party. She says she won't rush into setting out policy, though has opposed inheritance tax on farms and has been stinging in her criticism of Keir Starmer over grooming gangs and the Southport murderer. Her biggest threat politically is Reform UK, which is maintaining its strong showing in the polls. I spoke to her a little earlier. Kemi Badenoch, you've been pretty forthright about the killings in Southport. What do you think went wrong?
First of all, I think I'd start by saying just how horrific I found the whole incident, and especially the stories that have come out following the sentencing. I've got 2 girls who are similar ages to those murdered children, and my heart goes out to the victims and their families, and so many more who were attacked who thankfully survived. And I just think that when these incidents occur, we need to make sure we have a thorough understanding of what's gone wrong to stop it happening again, or certainly reduce the probability of it happening again.
But do you have an opinion about why Axel Rudakabana was missed?
No, I do not know why he was missed. I think it is extremely surprising that so many state bodies were involved. At one point, schools could see what was going wrong, social work, police, etc. Why is it that despite all of these schemes and all of these programs that we put in place, previous governments, successive previous governments of all parties, certain people still slip through the cracks? And I think that an inquiry, which the Prime Minister has announced, and I do welcome that, should look at that. But I also think we need to look at much more than exactly what the state actors are doing. How we process information, what people believe they are or are not allowed to say, what they should be saying, because I think all of that has an influence. If there are people in a community who see someone like that and don't act or don't say anything because they think they're not supposed to, I think we'll end up seeing many more people slip through the cracks. We need society as well as the state bodies to get involved.
Does that suggest that you agree with the letter that's gone, I think, from two cabinet ministers today, essentially suggesting that social media platforms should be playing a bigger role here, perhaps in censoring or policing material that people can see?
I think you're referring to the letter, I believe, Yvette Cooper wrote. So these are things that we've been saying for a long time. Sometimes I believe that they can be a distraction, that social media should do more. Of course it should do. We've put in legislation for that we should ban the sale of knives. We've put in multiple laws banning all sorts of different knives. But those things will only ever go so far. We need to look at the root of where these behaviours come from, whether it is extremist ideology of whatever flavour, whether it's religious or related to hate of a particular group or sex. We need to start looking more at how we bring more people into society, integrate them across a whole range of issues.
All right, on Ruda Kubana himself, should there have been a longer sentence available to the judge?
I do believe that there should have been. I think that the fact that if he had done this 10 days later, he would have been eligible for a whole life sentence is something that we should look at. In those areas, I think that we could see some judicial discretion. But he has a very long sentence, 52 years. What I want to make sure is that victims don't have to see their perpetrators after such serious and heinous crimes. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that people should be put in prison for life. And it's unfortunate that he escaped that just by being a little bit younger, just by a few days.
Some people, including, I think, one or two of your own colleagues, think that the best way to make sure that victims never encounter the perpetrator again is to bring back the death penalty. Do you have any sympathy for that point of view?
I understand why a lot of people think that. And we've had death penalty conversations in this country and debates about it for many decades. There's a reason why we don't have it anymore. I personally don't think that that would solve things. I do think that there are many arguments people have made that are good about the cost of keeping people in prison for long periods of time and so on. But I don't think that that's the way we should go.
All right, let's turn to the economy. I know there's absolutely no point asking you about policies for government, but
you can ask.
I can ask. I know I'm going to be wasting my time. You don't have to have policies for government, but you do have to have policies for opposition, because that's your job. You're opposed to the rise in national insurance, inheritance tax changes, we know that. Do you want the Chancellor to change her mind on non-doms?
I think that the Chancellor needs to look at where growth comes from. I fundamentally believe that this Labour government does not understand where money comes from, where growth comes from. Government doesn't create growth, it's business. And if we have people who set up businesses leaving our country, that's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible for all of those people who want jobs, who want wage increases, for us seeing an increase in productivity and prosperity, just a better quality of life. I think that we made mistakes as well in government. I did not like our non-dom policy, but Labour has made it worse. And the little tweaks which they've adjusted aren't going to save anything.
When you say you didn't like your non-dom policy, what didn't you like about it?
I didn't like the fact that we were penalising people who had chosen to earn an income here and who were paying taxes here. What the policies mean is that you tax them on earnings outside the country. But if you do that in a competitive environment, when other countries aren't doing that, you will lose a lot of people who are investors, who bring wealth who bring money, who bring jobs to the country.
So you'll approve of her essentially softening the position on non-doms, making it a little bit easier for them to bring their money here and so on?
I don't think we should treat business people as if they are bad people just because they're wealthy. We need to look at what kind of economy we want to structure in the UK, and we need to look at the elements that are required in order to make that economy grow. That is where the money for public services comes from.
Well, look, everybody agrees growth is a big thing, and the Chancellor is saying that she wants to kickstart growth by removing planning obstacles. How are all the Conservatives and constituencies, for example, like your own, which are largely rural, going to feel about removing the opportunities to object to new housing developments?
So I'll start by saying that the Conservative Party is under new leadership, and what I believe is that this country needs to be able to build, because we have to leave something for the next generation. We can't just keep living off what previous generations have done. Now, that needs to be done properly, right homes in the right places. So if Labour is doing good things on planning, we will support them, because we need to get building again. We need to remember how to deliver infrastructure, not have it take 20, 30 years and getting cancelled all the time. And I think that that's what the people out there want to see. They want to see how we're developing our country.
Oh, that's interesting. So when Conservative MPs start screeching about the removal of the environmental quangos, right to object, the 3 chances that local people have to object, reducing that to 1, you're going to say to them, get back in your box. We need to encourage growth. Let's support the Chancellor.
What I'm saying is that the Conservative Party is under new leadership. We haven't seen the details of what Labour is doing.
Yeah, but we know the direction of travel.
But if they are doing the right thing, we will support them. When I see the individual details, we'll be able to say more. Of course, we want local people to have a say. They should have a say. Many of them want to see their communities do better. Many of them want to see better infrastructure. I say this as a rural MP. The infrastructure around the Essex-Cambridgeshire area could do with an upgrade. That requires money which many of those non-doms you were just talking about could be bringing, but the policies have to be joined up.
OK.
They have to be joined up, and that's what we're not seeing from Labour.
Well, let's deal with a big test, which, by some measures, the Chancellor failed when asked her about this. Would you support the 3rd runway at Heathrow? Chancellor wouldn't tell me whether she would or not, will you?
So I've had to vote on this before, and I voted in support of the 3rd runway. And I am somebody who tells the truth and is consistent. I know that it is very difficult for a lot of people when there's an airport in your area. I know because I am the MP for an airport as well. Stansted Airport is in my constituency. And I have never opposed growth or development. What I want to do is make sure it's done in the right way. OK,
but in principle, the Conservative Party, under new leadership, will back the 3rd runway.
Now, this is one of the things which I've made very clear, that if you're a constituency MP and you have perhaps a personal reason why you need to represent your constituents, I think that that's legitimate. But we are talking about the future. Okay. I think that we need to make sure that we deliver infrastructure. And if Heathrow Airport thinks that a 3rd runway is deliverable within the criteria that's set, then I think that we should, be honest and do the right thing. I voted for it before, so why would I change my mind? And that was it. That was a Conservative whip.
That is admirably clear, and I think it adds up to yes. Yes?
We did this before. I don't understand why politicians go back and forth on things. With me, you will always get a clear answer.
OK, so I'm taking the clear answer as you will back a 3rd runway.
I certainly will, yes.
OK, Rachel Reeves' growth plans depend on immigration running at something north of 300,000 a year over the next 5 years. Would you agree it's hard to see how we fill the jobs needed to grow the economy without immigration?
I disagree. I think that immigration is already too high. And when I was in government, I was constantly told by, OBR reports and the IFS, etc., that we needed immigration for growth. We had more immigration than ever before, and the growth was not commensurate with that. We need to change the way things work. It's too high, and we need an economy where all of those people who are out of work in this country get back to work. That's where we need to start from.
So how are you going to cut it down at the same time as staffing the hospitals and social care and doing the building of homes?
There are many things that you can do. First of all, start with the people in this country who are out of work.
Yeah, you've got to train. It takes years to train people.
That's true, but it's not fair that we take doctors from poor countries who have trained them and take them away from places that they're needed. That's not fair. I lived in a country where all of the doctors were leaving to go to wealthier countries in the West. What we are doing is bad for our country and it is bad for the world. Let's fix what is going on here.
All right. On immigration, you've made a really interesting point, which is that numbers matter, but integration matters more.
Yes, culture matters more, yes.
Yeah. When you talk about this, who are you talking about, and why would integration be more difficult for some rather than others?
Trevor, you've asked me this question before, I remember.
And I didn't get an answer then, so I'm asking you
Actually,
again.
you got a very, very clear answer. And one of the things that I don't think we have been doing in this country properly is having a proper immigration strategy. And many people assume that it's just something that government does. It has to go well beyond government. All of society has to do it. And that's what used to happen when we had immigration in much smaller, much more manageable numbers. And the numbers that we have seen over the last few decades mean that we are getting people having separate and insular communities. The most extreme example of this is what we saw with the rape gangs, where people who'd been coming to this country from the 60s, from a particular region and sub-community in Pakistan, get here, stay insular, not interested in integration, and then you start seeing very, very toxic, I would say evil habits propagating, and no one doing anything about it because they're separate. We have to make sure that we have a dominant culture in our country, and the people who move here want to help make the UK a better place. Our country is not a hotel, it's not a dormitory, this is our home.
But you have made a separate point, or perhaps a connected point, about who those people are, and basically who you would prefer to come.
Oh, what did
here.
I say specifically? What do you mean?
You said that you worried about peasants who form sub-communities. Now, you can explain to me what you mean, but one way of reading this would be that you would prefer to have more middle-class Nigerians and fewer people from rural backgrounds in Bangladesh.
Let me be very, very clear. Immigration is too high, across the board, legal or illegal. But the point I was making there was about a specific report on that community of people who are predominant in the rape gangs. They did come from a particular place where they were mostly peasant farmers. They were insular, even from the rest of Pakistan. They're not like the people in Lahore. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to fix. I hear a lot of people talk about Asian grooming gangs, about Pakistani grooming gangs. A lot of people are being blamed. A lot of innocent people who happen to share characteristics are being blamed. So let's be specific. That was a literal word that has evidence behind it about where these people have come from, what they have been doing.
So
and we should not be afraid to talk about that.
So we're going to apply a class lens to our immigration.
And this is, Trevor, forgive me, this is one of the problems, that when there is an issue where we have victims, girls are being raped and attacked, the conversation is more about the language that we're using. Well, what should we call the people? We can't be shy about things like that. And that's what I'm most interested in, the victims.
I'm interrupting you because you routinely complain that you're misquoted and misunderstood by people like me. Now, I just want to be clear.
Not often, not often.
Okay,
I think you're quite
often
fair.
enough. I want to give you the opportunity to be clear. You are not saying, I think, you're saying that different kinds of people bring different things. One path that might lead you to is to say that we should block immigration from certain parts of certain countries.
When you have low-skilled immigration from people who are not interested in integrating, you will have a problem. That is something that needs to be looked at. We should not treat somebody who has no education, no English, no skills, the same as a wealthy doctor who has come from a country close by like France. And at the moment, that's what's happening. And that's what's been happening for many, many decades. We can't do that. It's not sustainable. We need to be able to make sure that the people who are coming to our country are people who contribute. And of course, we will have exceptions where we have refugees, genuine asylum seekers, not just people who are claiming asylum when they're actually economic migrants. But I'm not afraid to talk about that. And it is because a lot of people have been afraid that problems have festered and got worse. And we need politicians who will tell the truth. Conservative Party is under new leadership. That's what I'm here to do.
So much more to talk about. I hope you'll come back. Thank you, Kemi Badenoch, for your
Thank you,
time this
Trevor.
morning. Back to Craig Oliver, Aisha Hazarika, John Soper. Well, that's the first time that Kemi Badenoch has been in this studio, and as ever, she doesn't fail to surprise. What did you make of that?
Well, I thought one of the really interesting things in terms of policy was quite a lot of consensus and agreement from her on the things that we were just discussing about. It was like she was agreeing with quite a lot of the Rachel Reeves interview you did. She was essentially saying she didn't love the non-dom stuff, but she was pretty much agreeing with it. She was pretty much agreeing with the need to build and do planning reform and a lot of support for the third runway. What was interesting about that is she was kind of endorsing Rachel Reeves' sort of long-term infrastructure plan. So I think
Actually, she was more Rachel Reeves than Rachel Reeves on the third runway.
I thought that was fascinating. Fascinating.
John?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I thought that she was really clear about the need that Britain has to build, that she wants to... You know, she started off by saying Labour doesn't understand how business works and that business is the engine of growth, and then proceeded to talk about how Labour is getting it right in the sort of policies that it is introducing. So, I mean, look, she's the leader of the opposition, so she has to oppose what the government is doing. But I thought there was a broad degree of consensus there. I think the other thing about Kemi Badenoch is that she does speak out and that she's quite provocative in a lot of ways in the intellectual self-confidence with which she presents an argument. And I thought the conversation you had at the end there about integration and which groups should be allowed to come into Britain and who we should prefer was outspoken, and she's done that on other issues as well. I don't know whether it's always the greatest thing to be the leader of the opposition who is the one that is making those arguments. You want sort of slightly rebellious people who kind of can set the terms of an argument and other people to follow on.
Let's come to that second area in a moment. But Craig, are we beginning to see more definition of this leader yet?
No, and I think that's probably quite a good thing, actually, given the stage she's at. She can't forget the fact that there's probably not going to be a general election for at least 4 years' time, and nailing herself down too much is problematic. And I think strategically she's got to be in that position, so she's going to frustrate people like you. Just to John's point, I remember David Cameron saying to me about his time in opposition, is it took him quite a while to realise you shouldn't oppose everything. And actually, it isn't always the job of the opposition to always oppose. It is to support things. And you actually end up getting yourself into quite a bit of trouble. If she stands up and says, look, I'm opposing growth measures, then she wouldn't get very far. I thought it was a really interesting thing to see the knots that Rachel Reeves tied herself in over the third runway, as opposed to where Kemi Badenoch was willing to just come out and say that she's going to do it. The other thing I think was interesting was I think she is really willing to push all this kind of cultural stuff. She does think she's onto a strong suit there. I think she probably is right that a lot of people would say, look, if somebody's uneducated, doesn't speak English, there obviously shouldn't be as high up the immigration tables as a fully skilled doctor or something like that. The problem I think she gets into and makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable is when she starts saying, well, who is responsible for rape culture and that kind of thing. That starts feeling a bit more uncomfortable for a lot of people.
I mean, I think, look, it's easier for Kemi Badenoch to say, yeah, I'll do Heathrow, because she's not in a position, she's nowhere near the levers of power. I think we also have to understand that when you are in government, you have a process, and Craig will know this as well. You have to go through a process of how you announce things. I mean, clearly this was leaked or floated. I was just sort of checking. I mean, funnily enough, Ed Miliband has said that he will categorically not resign over this. But I do think that after those two
That's
interviews...
weird. The Cabinet Minister has to say, I'm not going to resign if something happens.
What's interesting, I think, certainly for the strategists at Downing Street, having watched both of those interviews, they will feel pretty happy after that Kemi Badenoch interview, because they will feel that her consensus is almost a vindication of what they are trying to do.
Trevor, it's just worth adding that when Tony Blair went into Downing Street in 1997, the next Conservative Prime Minister, David Cameron, your former boss, was working as a press officer for Carlton Television. So, I mean, you know, the idea that Kemi Badenoch is kind of, right, I'm next, I'm going to get my hands on the levers of power any moment now. I mean, she is playing it long, and it's probably very wise to do so.
The other point which you've drawn attention to is that she's obviously trying to shift the debate about immigration, which is still salient issue number one, actually, oddly enough, still up there with the economy. She's trying to shift that from a discussion about numbers to type. And as you're saying, Craig, this makes some people feel uncomfortable. But is it the right place to pitch your tent?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? She's got two flanks that are exposed. One is what she's got to do with the current Labour administration and what she's going to do on growth. She's definitely got the issue of reform to her right, and she needs to demonstrate that she's tough in this area. I think that she is trying to say, look, I am going to be as tough as Nigel Farage. You don't need to worry about that with me. The problem for her is she's got this kind of push me, pull you, hasn't she? She's losing Liberal Conservatives on one side the more she goes towards reform. So she's got this terrible balancing act that she's trying to perform, and it's not always comfortable.
Well, I thought that it was rather interesting. She used the word afraid, I think, 3 times in her last answer. And I wonder if actually part of the shtick here is not the actual issue, but the demonstration that I am authentic. I am never going to be afraid to talk about the things that you out there in pubs and bars and on the farms want to talk about.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. A part of this is her sort of framing her brand now as saying, I'm authentic, I'm real, I'm going to tell it how it is. The difficulty on immigration is, yes, she can sort of shift the conversation. The big problem is, what is one of the things that people were most upset with the last Conservative government about, and that was these absolutely huge rising. You know, it went from David Cameron saying, let's get immigration down to the tens of thousands to, you know, these absolutely huge figures. And yes, you should talk about integration. I say that as a very integrated, you know, child of immigrants. But to do that, you need time, you need a strategy, you need the state. And yes, of course, we must talk about all of the stuff around the grooming gangs, but just be careful not to build your whole immigration policy on one incident.
We will return. But next, I'm going to speak to an extraordinary woman, Renee Salt, who survived the horrors of Auschwitz.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion has just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks, but taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We've been crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Tomorrow marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, when the world started to realise the true horror of what the Nazi regime had been doing to the Jewish population of Europe. More than 6 million people were murdered. Millions more suffered unimaginably. Holocaust Memorial Day, marked tomorrow, feels more important than ever. We had the honour of speaking to Renee Salt, who survived Auschwitz. You had a remarkable story of essentially being passed over. Essentially, when you write about selections, people being selected.
Yeah.
Let's start with Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen. What do you remember of that time?
They were both very bad, but I found Bergen-Belsen even worse than Auschwitz, because it was so bad, you couldn't live there. You were brought there just to sit and wait to die. Auschwitz was bad enough, but Bergen-Belsen I found even worse.
If you can, describe a typical day. I don't know if there's such a thing as a typical day in Bergen-Belsen, but from your memory, what would a day be like?
You got up in the morning and you just carried on the best you could. There was nothing to eat, nothing to drink. The water had been cut off already when I got to Bergen-Belsen. The daily counting of the people stopped already because there was no point counting anyone. For every 1,000 people alive in the morning, there would only be 700 or 800 people alive in the afternoon. That's how quick people were dying. So there was no point counting anyone anymore. There were no more roll calls. And nothing to eat at all. There was nothing. Apparently bread stopped being supplied to people 2 weeks before I got there.
You were a teenager in the presence of death.
Yeah.
What did that do to you? What did that feel like?
It was terrible. You saw the corpses. It was so frightening. You never know when your next minute was to die. I was together with my mother. She kept me going, and I kept her going in a way. Without my mother, I wouldn't have survived one day. I don't think so. But she kept me going.
What would she say to you?
We didn't talk very much. We didn't have the strength to talk anymore. But her presence alone kept me going.
You were liberated by soldiers, amongst whom was your late husband.
Yes.
He must have had an awful experience actually discovering what was there in the camps. Did he talk about it?
He couldn't talk about Belsen. The tears were running down his face. He couldn't talk about Belsen.
That must have been very difficult for the two of you, because...
Yeah. We didn't talk about it. We couldn't.
Why do you think we need to know that story now?
Because perhaps we can avert another Holocaust from coming. I don't know, but maybe, just maybe.
You spoke to one of my colleagues at Sky News here some years ago, and you said anti-Semitism is very bad, that we need to stop the Holocaust happening again. Do you think that there is a possibility of that ever taking place again? Because people used to say never again.
There is a strong possibility. We hope that it will never happen again. We can only hope and pray that should quieten down.
When I spoke to Lily Ebert last year, the thing that she most strongly said is that the story needs to be told again and again, because either people forget or they, with the passage of time, they lose a sense of the scale of what happened.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I do, yes. Yes, I do agree. We must keep talking about it. That's why the Holocaust Education Trust is very good with that. They've got young ambassadors who help, talking about it. They go all over the world and they speak to people and they try to persuade them how to behave against anti-Semitism.
Do you feel that people might forget?
Yes, people do forget, but I hope they won't this time.
Sky News will bring you extended coverage of the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. We have a special programme tomorrow beginning at 2 p.m. with live coverage of the ceremony in Poland. Next, we'll speak to the man who Donald Trump sent to negotiate over Ukraine in his first stint in the White House.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave.
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who've made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Donald Trump said he'd end the Ukraine war on day one of his presidency. But there's still no end in sight to the death on the battlefields of Ukraine following Putin's illegal full invasion 3 years ago. So, can Mr. Trump deliver? And what would a negotiated settlement look like? Kurt Volker was Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations under Trump back in 2016. He joins us now. Good morning, Mr. Volker.
Good morning, Trevor. Great to be with you again.
Mr. Trump reckoned he could stop the day on the war, beg your pardon, on day one. That obviously hasn't happened. But what do you think his strategy actually is here?
Well, I think the strategy that he's applying, and we can see evidence of this already, is to try to demonstrate to Vladimir Putin that if he continues the war, it'll only harm Russia. It'll harm Russia's economy, it'll harm Russia's military, and that we are far stronger than Putin is, so he's going to have to stop now. So, for example, in a tweet on Tuesday of this week, he talked about urging Putin to stop the war. It's going to get worse if he keeps up. There's an easy way and a hard way, and it's better to go the easy way. So I think it's that kind of signaling to Putin to tell him to stop the war is the key thing.
But of course, that's a phrase that's that often, I mean, I don't know anything about gang warfare, but it's a phrase that's often used. You can do this the hard way or the easy way, blah, blah, blah. But in the art of the deal, Mr. Trump himself says, don't bluff unless you're prepared to deliver. What can he actually deliver that would genuinely frighten the most sanctioned country in the world?
Well, first off, I think gangster speak is probably the right way to communicate with Vladimir Putin, because I think he understands that. Secondly, I think that there are three big muscle movements that Trump can do. And the first one is guaranteed, he's already doing it, which is to make a big push to lower global oil and gas prices. And that is by increasing U.S. production, increasing exports, urging OPEC to lower their prices as well. This will have a significant impact on Putin's war crimes budget. The second is sanctions. And this is where he has inherited from the Biden administration in its last days some actually very tough sanctions on Russian energy. Up until those last days, the Biden administration had gone soft on Russian energy in order to avoid the possibility of raising gasoline prices at the pump in the United States. With greater energy production and lower overall prices globally, that is not a worry anymore. So Trump can leave in place those sanctions that were put there, and he can even tighten up implementation to include secondary sanctions on those who are helping Russia evade sanctions. And then the third thing is to demonstrate a continued willingness to provide Ukraine with the military support that it needs to fight against Russia. And this is one where Trump has made clear he will not spend taxpayer money to do so. But there are two big sources of funding that he wants to tap. One of them is the $300 billion worth of frozen Russian assets in Europe that can be seized, and some of that to be spent on U.S. defense articles. And the other is to provide loans to Ukraine so that they can buy U.S. defense articles and pay us back later, very much as the U.S. did with the U.K. during World War II.
This is a very, the point you've just, I want to come to Zelensky and Ukraine in a second, but the point you've just made is a very interesting one, which I haven't heard this week, that when Mr. Trump says drill, baby, drill, that's aimed as much at Mr. Putin as it is at the American public.
Well, it's definitely aimed at the U.S. economy and U.S. economic growth, but it has those other beneficial effects, and Trump is very well aware of it.
The Ukrainians, of course, are in the middle of this, and everybody says that Ukraine must make its own decision and we will follow Mr. Zelensky and in any negotiations and so on and so forth. Well, that doesn't seem really part of the Trump playbook. What do you think Zelensky is thinking right now?
Well, Zelensky has spoken with President Trump at least 4 times over the last 4 months. They met together in New York in September. He's called him a few times, including immediately after the presidential election, to congratulate him. And you'll remember the interview he did on Sky News back in December, where he was saying things that were very much in alignment with where President Trump is steering this. So there seems to be some coordination. What President Zelensky said is that he recognizes that they won't be able to take back all of the territory militarily. They can live with a ceasefire and a long-term dispute with Russia where they try to get the return of the territory by other means, but they do need security guarantees for all of Ukraine that's not occupied. And this is a big step for President Zelensky to say this in a public setting. And by saying this, he's demonstrating Ukraine is willing to deal, and it helps Trump put the onus on Putin, that Putin is the one who is obstructing peace.
Kurt Volker, thank you so much for your time this morning.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Trevor.
In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
Migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
The journey you've been through, it's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See. This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power.
No freedom!
Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
It makes the Back to our panel, Craig Oliver, Aisha Hazarika and John Sopel, who we've just been chatting during the break, so completely forgot we're on a television.
Now you tell us.
Let's return, I guess, to what they call the big kahuna in Hollywood. Monday, Trump inauguration, he has come back. The man is 78. He's a whirlwind of energy and has occupied pretty much all the space this week, John.
It's been remarkable, and I'm sure at the White House they're absolutely cock-a-hoop. Everything, the way it's unfolded, the blizzard of announcements, Trump everywhere, speaking non-stop. It's such a contrast towards the final days of Biden when nothing happened. I spent the first 2 days of this week in Davos, and it was like there were all these corporates wandering around with white flags saying, yep, we surrender. Yeah, all our kind of desires on DEI and all those other policies. Yeah, we know that Donald Trump's in town. We realise we've got to get competitive. And I think that the remarkable extent to which everyone has just capitulated and just says, he's the boss, we accept it. It's very, very different from 8 years ago when there was this sense of resistance to what Donald Trump wanted to do. That has gone.
You two are great image makers, and I guess the extraordinary image is of Davos, all these captains of industry presiding over multi-billion-dollar companies sitting, looking up obediently at the vast screen dominated by Donald Trump. Deliberate?
That was a huge... Yes, that's definitely a moment, isn't it? Everybody looking at the huge screen. The other big image of the week is seeing all the tech bosses just lined up in the rotunda as he was being inaugurated while all the key governors and senators were in another ante-room. It was a real interesting week in terms of showing where the power is. And I think what Trump has been able to do is just keep everybody guessing. You were talking to Kurt Volker. Putin's sitting there going, I don't know, is this guy going to flood the market with oil and gas and wreck my economy and cause problems for me? And you see that with the tech bosses as well. The only thing I would just say as a way of caution is, look, we'll see. It's a week. It's been an extraordinary week. It's been unbelievably effective. But over the next 4 years, is it going to sustain that?
Is it just a show?
Well, I mean, I think it's just so interesting. To coin a phrase, the kaleidoscope has been shaken. You know, everything has changed. And to John's point, not even so much people waving the white flag as, prostrating themselves in front of what is now feels like a kind of global emperor. I mean, it does feel his dominance across, domestic politics, geopolitics, economic affairs, what's happened in the Middle East, culture, the kind of culture wars. So he feels his kind of primacy feels very potent right now. And I think that's something we've all got to get our head around. I mean, funny enough, in my wing of politics on the left, I got chided by a colleague of mine for saying, when you go on the television, you're not crying enough about Trump, you're not shouting enough about Trump. And I was like, well, look, the left have tried to do that. It didn't go so well. We all need to sort of reframe how we deal with this. But Craig is right. He is at the height of his powers now. We are not even 7 days, 6 days in. Let's just see how this plays out. Look, I'm no great fan of the man, but if he can bring peace to Ukraine, and that's a good thing, if he can make the ceasefire hold in the Middle East, but let's see what happens.
He is at the height of his powers, but I think what he's also doing is that we've been forced to recognise quite how powerful the United States is just per se at the moment. The other extraordinary statistic this week was $500 billion going to be invested in what's called Stargate, which is all the infrastructure around AI. In the UK, if we could invest 1% of that, we would be laughing and saying, isn't that great, isn't it amazing? It is an extraordinary power that the United States has in all fields at the moment, and you've got a guy sitting on top of it saying, I am going to wield this power, and if people don't do what I want to do, I'm going to punish them.
Yeah. And that sets up the most fascinating battle between Donald Trump and Elon Musk about who is the real power in America. Because Elon Musk, who has been right by Donald Trump's side since the election, and kind of some people saying he's more powerful than the president, has been decrying this on X.
But there's another way of looking at it.
But Elon Musk's complaint is that there's not enough money.
Yeah, but he said that these other companies haven't got the money. The White House was furious about it.
We've all seen the relationship between Musk and Trump as a sort of a battle of egos. It's not automatically going to come off the rails at some stage. Other people, I think, are more interestingly saying it's almost like a father-son relationship, and actually it could sustain. It hasn't blown up yet. It is sustaining so far. Lots of people said it would have gone by now.
It is early days, and I just do think Elon Musk is a really dangerous force in democracy. we talk about these tech bros. They are the overlords of the world right now. They are not bound by laws, by jurisdiction. They have this unfettered power. We just heard your amazing interview with the survivor from Auschwitz. We're celebrating Holocaust Memorial Day tomorrow. We have Elon Musk basically saying to Germany, forget what happened in the past. It doesn't matter. Move on. We'll tell that to your survivor who bravely spoke. So I just think, we're all slightly, kind of dazzled by the gangsters, the succession thing, the Trumps, the Elon Musk. But at the heart of it, I think, is a very dangerous man, and I think that's Elon Musk.
But go back to where your programme started today with Rachel Reeves and her trying to unleash, kind of the energy in the UK economy. She's absolutely right. At Davos, the European political leaders have got a real problem that you've got this rather corporatist, statist kind of approach with lots of regulation. And Donald Trump is saying, I'm going to be ripping up regulation like you've never seen before. We're going to be competitive. We're going to unleash the animal spirit of the US economy.
But that's why Rachel Reeves is right.
Yes, I agree.
Pressing forward with build, baby, build. It should be the mantra for Britain.
I love having a professional broadcaster on the show because John just does my work for me and segues us back to poor old little Britain and our own government and its hold on the economy. Let's have a look at how they are doing according to the public's view. Ask who is contributing to the British economy being in a poor state. I think the big problem, if I were sitting in number 10 or number 11 now, would be those two middle bars. People think that Starmer Reeves' decisions are as responsible as Truss Kwarteng decisions. And the thing that they come in and they say every single week is, it's like this because of our inheritance. It's not working anymore, is it?
Yeah, and I think it's a real lesson in what happens if you don't get your story straight. I think the Labour Party, if they could rewind 6 months, would say, yes, we've got to do a bit in terms of blaming the previous administration, but we also have to have a bit of boosterism, a bit of optimism. Tony Blair wrote in his book on leadership at the end, he says, nobody wants to get on a plane with a depressed pilot. And I think that the Labour Party have discovered that, is that they do need a key message. And I was just listening to what we've all been saying here. Imagine a year ago, you would say that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer, was saying, we've got to echo Trump. That is an extraordinary situation to be in, that it has twisted so much to that stage.
Aisha?
Well, look, at the end of the day, what's going to matter is how people are feeling as we head into the next general election.
That doesn't say...
Well, look, we're only 6 months in, but at the end of the day, growth shouldn't just be something which is abstract, and it is not. What do we learn from what's happened in America? What do we learn from what happened with Joe Biden? It doesn't matter if you hold up a graph or a chart and say, hey, guys, growth's really good because it's going upwards. It's how ordinary people are going to feel in terms of prices, wages, rents, mortgages, fuel and public services are better. That's going to be the test of whether this government has succeeded, and that's what growth will... That's how growth has got to feel real to people.
Just looking at that chart, the original one that you showed, if journalists are interested in the today, and it's a nightmare for Labour that they are not seen as any better than Truss Kwarteng. However, as Aisha says, there's 4 more years of this government. They really have to deliver on this, and not just in terms of headline numbers, but in terms of real people's lives.
Well, these journalists are interested for the next 4 years. They haven't sacked me yet. It is here for this week. I'll be back next Sunday.